In 1991, a country that had been erased from maps for centuries suddenly reappeared. Ukraine declared independence with over 90% support, even in Crimea, which was 75% Russian. But this wasn't just another post-Soviet breakup story. This was the beginning of a geopolitical chess game that would culminate in the largest war in Europe since World War II. What happened in those 30 years between independence and invasion? The answer will shock you. I'm about to tell you the incredible story of modern Ukraine, a nation caught between two worlds, fighting for its identity while superpowers played tug-of-war with its future. This isn't just history. It's the story of how one country's struggle for independence triggered a conflict that's reshaping the entire world order. From the collapse of the Soviet Union to the Orange Revolution, from the Euromaidan protests to Putin's full-scale invasion, we'll uncover the shocking decisions, betrayals, and power plays that led to today's war. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why Ukraine became the flashpoint that could determine the future of democracy itself. Let's start with December 1st, 1991, a date that changed everything. Ukraine held a referendum that would make history. The question was simple: do you support the act of declaration of independence of Ukraine? But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this vote. 92.3% said yes. We're talking about over 28 million people choosing independence. Even more shocking, in Crimea, yes, the same Crimea that Russia would later annex, 56% voted for Ukrainian independence, despite being 75% ethnically Russian. This wasn't just a political decision. It was a declaration that Ukrainians saw themselves as a distinct people with their own destiny. But what they didn't know was that this vote would set in motion a 30-year struggle that would ultimately lead to war. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. In 1991, Ukraine inherited something incredible from the Soviet Union, the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. We're talking about 1,900 strategic nuclear warheads, enough firepower to level entire continents. But then Ukraine made a decision that would haunt them decades later. In 1994, they signed the Budapest Memorandum, agreeing to give up all their nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, the US, and the UK. The deal promised to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ukraine became a non-nuclear state by 1996, sending their last warhead to Russia for dismantling. At the time, it seemed like the responsible thing to do. But looking back now, knowing what we know about 2014 and 2022, this decision takes on a completely different meaning. Fast forward to 2004, and Ukraine faced its first major test of democracy. The presidential election pitted two victors against each other. Viktor Yanukovych, who wanted closer ties with Russia, and Viktor Yushchenko, who wanted to move toward Europe. When Yanukovych was declared the winner, something extraordinary happened. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians poured into the streets of Kyiv, wearing orange and demanding a fair election. They called it the Orange Revolution, and it was Ukraine's first real taste of people power. But here's the crazy part. During the campaign, Yushchenko was literally poisoned with dioxin. His face became disfigured and scarred. Many suspected Russian involvement, though it was never proven. Despite this assassination attempt, or perhaps because of it, the Orange Revolution succeeded. The election was rerun, and Yushchenko won. This was Ukraine's first major victory for democracy, but it also marked the beginning of Russia's more aggressive interference in Ukrainian affairs. Now we come to the event that changed everything. The Euromaidan protests of 2013 to 2014. President Yanukovych, yes, the same guy who lost in 2004, had won the presidency in 2010. But in November 2013, he made a decision that would trigger the biggest crisis in Ukraine's modern history. Under pressure from Russia, Yanukovych refused to sign an association agreement with the European Union. Instead, he chose closer ties with Moscow. For many Ukrainians, this felt like a betrayal of their European aspirations. What started as student protests in Kiev's Independence Square, the Maidan, quickly grew into a massive movement. But then things turned violent. In February 2014, government snipers opened fire on protesters. Over 100 people were killed in what became known as the Heavenly Hundred. The violence backfired spectacularly. Parliament turned against Yanukovych, and he fled to Russia. Ukraine had its second revolution in a decade, but this time Putin was watching, and he was furious. Here's where Vladimir Putin enters our story as the main antagonist. For Putin, the Euromaidan wasn't just a Ukrainian revolution. It was a Western-backed coup designed to pull Ukraine away from Russia's sphere of influence. Putin's response was swift and brutal. In March 2014, Russian forces without insignia, the Little Green Men, seized control of Crimea. Within weeks, Russia had annexed the peninsula in a move that violated international law and the very Budapest Memorandum they had signed 20 years earlier. But Putin wasn't done. In eastern Ukraine, pro-Russian separatists, backed by Russian weapons and volunteers, declared independence in Donetsk and Luhansk. What followed was 8 years of frozen conflict that killed over 14,000 people. This was Putin's message to Ukraine. If you choose the West over Russia, there will be consequences. In 2019, Ukraine elected a president who seemed to come from nowhere. Volodymyr Zelensky, a comedian and actor who had played the president on TV. With 73% of the vote, he won the biggest electoral mandate in Ukrainian history. Zelensky promised to end corruption and bring peace to eastern Ukraine. But he also made it clear that Ukraine's future lay with Europe and NATO, not Russia. In 2019, Ukraine even amended its constitution to enshrine EU and NATO membership as strategic goals. For Putin, this was the final straw. A Ukraine firmly aligned with the West, potentially joining NATO, was his worst nightmare, a direct threat to Russian security and influence. On February 24, 2022, Putin launched what he called a special military operation, but what the world recognized as a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Putin's goals were clear: demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, code words for regime change, and bringing Ukraine back under Russian control. But something Putin didn't expect happened. Instead of collapsing within days as many predicted, Ukraine fought back with incredible determination. Zelensky, the comedian turned president, became a wartime leader, rallying his people in the world with the simple message, "I need ammunition, not a ride." The war that Putin thought would last days has now stretched for nearly 2 years, reshaping global politics and proving that Ukraine's independence isn't just a piece of paper. It's something Ukrainians are willing to die for. So there you have it, the incredible journey of modern Ukraine from independence to invasion. What started as a peaceful vote for independence in 1991 became a 30-year struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, between European integration and Russian domination. The key lesson here is that Ukraine's story isn't just about Ukraine. It's about the fundamental question of whether countries have the right to choose their own destiny, or whether powerful neighbors can dictate their future through force. From giving up nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees that were later broken, to two revolutions that chose democracy over authoritarianism, to a war that's still raging today, Ukraine's modern history is a masterclass in the price of freedom. The next time you hear about the war in Ukraine, remember, this isn't just a territorial dispute. It's the culmination of 3 decades of a nation fighting to define itself, and a reminder that independence is never guaranteed. It must be constantly defended. What do you think was the most crucial turning point in Ukraine's modern history? Was it the decision to give up nuclear weapons, the Orange Revolution, or the Euromaidan protests? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to understand more about how historical decisions shape our world today, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Next week, we're diving into another incredible story of how one country's choices changed everything.